Y'all are very sweet. It was great to get to meet some of you a minute ago. So I'll just jump in, okay? Now, when my kids were little, there was this cool little climbing gym close to our house, and I signed them up for the bouldering team. And I would take them there twice a week, and they would do their bouldering, which is basically wall climbing, but without ropes or harnesses. And instead, there's a giant crash pad under them, and they were taught how to fall without breaking their necks, which I was grateful for. I think that's a good skill to have. But if you're familiar with indoor climbing, you'll know what I'm talking about. So the big walls and that there's these little rocks that are really like plastic handholds and like little bitty ledges that you're supposed to put your foot on, and you take it all the way to the top, and getting to the top is called a problem. So if the kids did a yellow problem, they could only use the yellow rocks, okay, and they had to ignore all the other rocks. If they did the blue problem, they had to only use the blue rocks, but the blue rocks were fewer and farther between, so a blue problem was harder to solve than a yellow problem. Okay, so you get that. But all the problems were paths to the same goal. The goal was to get to the top and ring the bell, okay? And then you had solved your problem. And then also when anyone on the climbing team, like any of the kids were climbing, the other kids' job was to stand back and watch them and yell out encouragement. So they would say like, right there to the right, there's a handhold. Or like if you scoot to the left, you can get that one with your foot. Because when the kids were on the wall, they couldn't really see the rocks, okay? Because they're like nose to the wall, trying not to fall. And so they needed the perspective of the other kids on the team behind them to tell them where to go. So the help from the other kids was actually a huge part of solving the problem. So this reminds me of dating. Surprise, surprise, because there are lots of different ways to date. And some are harder than others. And some are riskier than others. And some are more likely than others to give you a one-way ticket to the crash pad, which, could be symbolic of heartbreak and relationship failure. And for some people who are dating, the prize at the top, ringing the bell, is actually a very shallow, very unreliable goal of like, you just get what you want, personal fulfillment, just getting your needs met kind of thing. But for faithful Christians, and in our case, faithful Catholics, the goal of our dating is a lot closer to something like wedding bells, okay? So we could say that the ringing the bell at the top is a happy, healthy marriage, okay? A great marriage to a great partner. And there's lots of different ways to get up there, lots of different ways to solve the problem. And just like the kids on the climbing team, when we're in it, we don't really have the full perspective, and we really do need people who are outside looking in, giving us good guidance, and they just want to see us get to the top safely. So, is that where the analogy ends? No. You might think just because we call this date to win that you know what the prize is. And you're probably like 3/4 right. The prize at the top of the wall, ringing the bell, really can symbolize happy, healthy marriage. But remember, while the kids were climbing, I was also there, watching them climb. I was the one writing the check to the bouldering team, and I had different goals in mind. I frankly didn't care if my kids were any good at climbing. I didn't care if they ever rang the bell. I had signed them up for bouldering because I wanted them to become better people. I wanted them to gain confidence, trying hard things, even if they fell 100 times, but not break their neck any of those times. I wanted them to grow in character and self-esteem, win or lose. Basically, I wanted my kids to come out of the climbing team stronger than the day they started. So this goal, the goal that was in my heart, even if my kids didn't know it, represents the real prize in dating, which is growth and holiness. Whether or not you ever find a person you want to marry, you are still winning when the relationships that you establish during your dating season are the kind that inspire you to grow in character, to grow in faith and humility, to become more and more holy a better version of yourself. Think about it. People will always tell you that you will grow in holiness so much once you are married. Or if you're in the church youth group, you'll grow in holiness so much if you go to summer camp. Or if you're in the kids program, if you go to Vacation Bible School, oh, you're just going to soak it up and grow so much. But why is it that when you're a young adult or an older adolescent and you're starting to date, people are like, whoa, that's rough. If you can just barely keep it together, if you can just not lose your faith, just don't get totally wrecked out, that's all we're asking. Like, no, dating should also be a time of personal and spiritual growth. But unfortunately, for a lot of people who are dating, the goal is like to just survive. So when you date in such a way that the goal is holiness, if you never marry or you discern out of marriage, then you still win because you dated in such a way as to have grown in holiness during that time. Everyone who's dating should grow while they are dating. You should become better. You're dating, so you should become better at loving and at being loved. You should become stronger in character, more ready for marriage, or whatever adventure God has for you. Okay, that's why on your little outline it talks about revise the prize. When you date with holiness as the goal, over and above, even ringing the bell at the top and getting married, you know that if you date someone and you go your separate ways, you don't have to see it as a bunch of wasted time that ended up leaving you just more broken. I mean, you might be disappointed. You might be heartbroken. You might have to mourn the death of a dream. But when both of you are dating for holiness, you don't have to end up devastated and emotionally wrecked out. That's why we say, wreck your ex, don't wreck your ex. Okay, what I mean that, when you're dating for holiness, and let's say you both go your separate ways, and now you have an ex-boyfriend or an ex-girlfriend, you don't have to end up totally wrecked out. So that's why we say, don't wreck your ex. But instead, you'll be able to recommend that person to someone else that you know. That's why we say, wreck your ex, don't wreck your ex. Okay, like, yeah, things didn't work out for me and Hunter, but I think you would really like him, so you should keep him in mind. Or like, Rachel and I aren't still dating, but like I told her that I thought you might be a good match, and she seemed interested, so you should totally ask her out. Okay, I'm gonna guess you've never heard anything like this before. This is very different from other dating ideas you've heard. But it starts with revising the prize, which isn't the personal, selfish, personal fulfillment prize, and it's not even marriage necessarily, even though that is a very valuable treasure, which I highly recommend. But when you revise the prize to holiness, everything has to change. The whole system of dating changes. It's like you were planning to go to Central Park, but then you change your destination to Yellowstone National Park, and you were planning on like taking your bike. Well, you have to completely replan everything. You have to rethink the whole endeavor. That's why we say that when you date for holiness, you also have to remodel the system. And that's the text I'm talking about.
Okay, so the ordinary way that people date, sort of our popular cultural model of dating, we call conventional dating. So you'll hear me use that term throughout. Conventional dating, we'll use that term. It's no secret that conventional dating isn't working for a lot of people, right? Yes, it does work sometimes, but not as often as it used to. I'm a professor of sociology, and I study changes in the family. And so one of the things that I have looked at over the years is how and why dating is getting harder for people, why it doesn't work as often as it used to in times past. Essentially, conventional dating is a model that was developed in the 1950s, and it hasn't really changed much since then. It's just gotten more and more disordered from when it first evolved in the 50s. So we don't think it's the best system if pursuing holiness is your goal. We know we need a better vehicle for our metaphorical trip to Yellowstone, right, than the bicycle we were going to take to Central Park. But what would that vehicle need to look like? So we can use the tools of social science and Christian wisdom to help us plan a better system. So from Christian wisdom and social science, we know that the two most important ingredients for a happy and healthy romantic relationship are intimacy and commitment. Intimacy is knowing and being known. It's really what we were created for, right? You know, in Catholic language, the end for us is the beatific vision, seeing God, knowing God, even as we are known by God, right? We get a little taste of it at adoration, but that's the ultimate goal. So knowing and being known is what we were made for. It's the really good stuff we want out of our relationships. But in order to know and be known, we need the security of a commitment. That's why all the social scientific evidence points to these two things being the two big predictors for a happy and healthy romantic relationship. So commitment gives us the security we need to share ourselves and invest in the relationship. Notice, this is why in marriage, where we expect the highest level of intimacy, Scripture talks about married people becoming one flesh, right? That's symbolic of the highest level of intimacy. But in order to achieve the highest level of intimacy, we also need the highest level of security or commitment, which is till death do us part. The strongest promise a human can make to another, right? Intimacy and commitment go together. So how does conventional dating handle intimacy and commitment? Well, in conventional dating, you find someone you're attracted to, and if they're attracted to you, you build intimacy until you break up or get engaged. That's pretty much it, right? That's the best it can do. You might pass through what my students call the talking phase, where you sort of aren't quite sure what's going on, but you kind of like each other. You might even make it to official. We had one of our former college students came for Mass and adoration, and she and her boyfriend were here, and they had to leave. So they made it to official status, right, where people call each other boyfriend or girlfriend. But what sort of commitment even is the official status? I promise to break up with you before I date someone else. That's basically all it is, right? That's what official boyfriend or girlfriend status means. I mean, what are you really committing to in that case anyway, right? It's very weak. So it puts you, conventional dating puts you in a situation where you're expected to put yourself out there. You're expected to become intimate with another person without the security that should come from commitment. And so because of this, conventional dating relationships tend to breed high levels of insecurity. And there's a lot of evidence that this is the case. This means that the partner in the relationship who is less invested actually has the most power in the relationship. That's pretty disordered, right? That is a setup for manipulative relationships. The less invested, more powerful partner can demand more and give less, while the more insecure partner tries to find ways to keep the other partner interested and invested. Surely we can do better than this, right? And from both social science and Christian wisdom, we learn that in order to build sustainable relationships, we just talked about happy and healthy relationships. For sustainable relationships, you need to build up certain virtues, like fortitude, that can help get a relationship through the hard times that every relationship will inevitably face. We also know that it takes time and a healthy dose of prudence, another virtue, to discover whether or not a relationship is a good fit for marriage, right? That just doesn't happen instantaneously. There's attraction at first sight, not love at first sight. Attraction at first sight is real, but that attraction needs to mature into other kinds of love in order to sustain a relationship. Does conventional dating do any better when it comes to building virtue and exercising prudence? It did pretty poorly on intimacy and commitment. Does it do any better on this? I think you already know the answer to this question. No, conventional dating just makes an idol out of romantic love. And then, in popular media, daters are encouraged just to move on when romantic love grows cold or stale, rather than letting that romantic attraction mature into the kinds of love that can sustain a relationship. And conventional dating tries to find fit using consumerism rather than prudence. How do you know someone is a good fit in conventional dating? Basically, you try that person on just like you would a pair of shoes, or test drive them like you would a car. That's basically the best that popular media gives us in terms of what conventional dating is. This is hardly a way to build up our fortitude muscles, right, that we need for sustainable relationships. Instead, the approach of conventional dating just trains us to always be on the lookout for something better. No wonder that a dating expert recently said, this generation doesn't know how to stop swiping or scrolling, right? We're building the wrong kinds of muscles when we use conventional dating. So hopefully you're convinced at this point, if you weren't already, that conventional dating is a really lousy system to get you to holiness if that's your goal. If you've revised the prize to holiness, conventional dating is not the best vehicle. We came to that conclusion over 25 years ago when we were struggling to figure out our own relationship while simultaneously trying to give advice to our friends who were even more confused about their relationships. Notice that our epiphany 25 years ago was long before social media or dating apps were a part of the problem. Yes, they are a part of the problem, but the deeper dysfunction of conventional dating has been around for a long time, longer than before Facebook was even a twinkle in Mark Zuckerberg's eyes. Yeah. So for over 25 years now, we've been researching and learning about dating and mentoring couples who were brave enough to try out some of our countercultural ideas. And we'll tell you, though some of the things we're saying and will continue to say might be different than what you've heard before, the young adults that we've worked with have had no complaints. They've been happy with the results, and some of their stories will be in the book that we're working on this semester, and we'll probably finish up next semester. Some of them ended up married. Some of them figured out that they weren't a good fit. Either way is a win when you're dating for holiness. We don't think we have the perfect system, because there isn't a perfect system. But we do think date to win, which is what we call our system, is vastly superior to conventional dating. So you've heard the first part already, revising the prize, from dating for self-fulfillment or marriage to dating for holiness. The second part, remodeling the system, which you see on your outline here, has two components: understanding the seasons of romantic relationships and using time-bound commitments. Betsy's going to tell you about the seasons, and then I'll come back and tell you about time-bound commitments.
Okay, so you probably have already realized that romantic relationships have natural seasons that they go through. It's not like a mathematical cut and dry thing. It's more organic. So that's why we call them seasons, because it's very organic. We know that like the seasons of the year generally perform as predicted. So like in the summer, you don't want to be lugging around a heavy coat in Manhattan, but in the winter, you don't want to get caught without one. So just in the same way, dating seasons, it's good to know what season you're in, because then you know how to act appropriately and what's expected. So the dating seasons we call discovery. Oh, here they are. Discovery, dating, and discernment. And then dating is broken up into early dating and seriously dating. So in discovery season, that's when you're open to beginning a romantic relationship. You might be interested in multiple people. You might be hoping that someone you kind of like also likes you, and you're willing to give someone a chance to show you their best self. And you're willing to be vulnerable enough to share yourself to an extent as well. So like during discovery season, you might even say something like, yeah, we're going to go out as friends. In dating season, you have found a specific potential romantic partner. You both have some feelings for each other that go beyond just initial attraction. So then the division is of early dating is you're focusing on getting to know each other a little more personally, but it still looks a lot like discovery season. The difference is that instead of being open to all these great people you know, you're focused on one person, and you're kind of in early dating season. Seriously dating, you're even more focused just on one person, and you might even call each other girlfriend and boyfriend. During discernment season, you know that you love each other. You might say that you're in love with this person. You might have told each other, I love you. And you want to make a good decision, though, about marriage, because just because you're in love with someone, it still doesn't mean that you should get married. And then also for discernment season, timing really matters. You need to be in a place in your life where you could get married in the next couple years. And if that's not really a possibility, then you should probably stay in the dating season and just kind of pace the relationship until you're at a place where marriage is a possibility for the nearish future. So those are the 3 seasons that we've kind of identified. And if you keep those in mind for the rest of the talk, because we refer to them, because things are different for each season. So the second thing that Chuck just mentioned, though, is time-bound commitments. And this is his scholastic invention, so I'll let him. You want me to pass him out and you can start talking about it? Okay.
So Betsy is passing around a second handout, which on the side we'll be looking at it. It says "Our Time-Bound Commitment," and it has a smaller Date to Win logo on the side that I'm directing your attention to. Okay, so time-bound commitments are a tool that you use to navigate the seasons of romantic relationships. And I'll wait till all our handouts get out and get passed around. Do you need some more, or we got them all? Okay. So what is a time-bound commitment? It is a set of promises with an expiration date. In Catholic language, a time-bound commitment is essentially a rule of life applied to dating for a specific period of time. So when I say time-bound commitment, you might be like, what is that thing? I've never heard of that. It turns out if you've been Catholic for very long, you've actually done them and you didn't even know that's what it was. Because if you've ever prayed a novena or given up sweets during Lent, you've actually made a time-bound commitment, right? It's a set of promises with an expiration date. So now we'll explain how to use a time-bound commitment for dating. So on the side that has most of the information, our time-bound commitment, at the top there's a place to indicate which season you're in. So this is the sort of thing that if there's someone you've met and you are interested in pursuing that relationship, that romantic relationship, you have a conversation with one another and decide to make a time-bound commitment with one another. So which season you're in often is pretty obvious, just like the seasons of the year, right? All you have to do is walk outside and know it's summer in New York right now. But sometimes, especially during transitional times, this can make for a good discussion. So that's why we have that at the top, sort of establishing together. And sometimes people aren't on the same page, so this helps you get on the same page about kind of where you are in terms of romantic relationships. Next is a plan for chastity. Since Date to Win is a Christian model and the goal is holiness, pursuing chastity is assumed. This is a great group. We don't have to talk a whole lot about that. There's that assumption here. But you should still make a plan, right? If you're in a romantic relationship, don't just assume your good intentions or raw willpower will get you to chastity. You need to have a plan to be chaste. If you're in the discovery season and you're clearly just friends, you might not need much detail on this, but it's good still to have a discussion. And in the other stages, it's good to have a plan. On the first handout we gave you, on the back, where it says some samples for your time-bound commitment, at the top there are a couple sample plans for chastity, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about there. Next up is length of commitment. So for length of commitment, you would agree together on the start and end dates of the time-bound commitment. This is where it gets odd. If you've never heard of anything like this, it seems like such a strange thing to people. But again, it's familiar if you've prayed a novena or given up sweets for Lent. So in general, in the early seasons, it's important to keep time-bound commitments short and then make them longer as a relationship matures. But even in the discernment season, which is the last of the 3 seasons, we don't recommend a time-bound commitment longer than 6 months. In discovery and early dating, the end date is an expiration date. There's no commitment after this date by default. No harm, no foul, no whining. You kept your promises to each other, and that's great. I mean, how many places in society these days are people implying or breaking promises, right? just keeping promises together in a relationship, even if they're small promises, that is a win. That builds your virtue. So that's great, even if the relationship doesn't continue romantically. And any continuation of it would need someone to initiate a new time-bound commitment. One of the people would say, hey, I'd like to do something like this again, right? There needs to still be that initiative. It's not default. Otherwise, there's nothing to discuss, nothing to decide. You both are still free. In serious dating, the end date is still an expiration date, but there needs to be a good, honest conversation at or around the end date. You've built a friendship by this point, right? And you want to honor that friendship. If you don't want to continue with a new time-bound commitment, you need to give reasons why at that point, so that the other person isn't left wondering what happened. And then in discernment, it's even more necessary to talk at the end of a time-bound commitment. You'll plan a meeting at or around the end date where you'll show up with a clear decision in mind. Whether you want to, 1, get engaged, 2, enter into another time-bound commitment, another discernment time-bound commitment, or 3, not enter into another time-bound commitment. If you decide not to enter into another one, then that's a pretty big deal, and you owe the person a thorough, respectful reasoning why. In Date to Win, we don't think anyone should end up wondering what happened, thinking you were on the same page, and then all of a sudden you're ghosted. Right? That's not how we should treat each other. So in this system, in these more serious seasons, there needs to be a conversation, even though there's an expiration date. So to review, in discovery, the commitments are about 3 to 6 weeks. There's no commitment after the end date. Early dating, about 3 weeks to 2 months would be the lengths. No new commitment after the end date. You have to initiate it, right? You have to start over, start again. Seriously dating, 6 weeks to 4 months, and you commit to an honest discussion on or around the end date. Discernment, 3 to 6 months, so these are longer time-bound commitments, but still not longer than 6 months, and you commit to an honest decision at or around the end date, including reasons why. Next up is level of exclusivity. This might seem obvious. You agree not to date anyone else during the time-bound commitment, but there are a couple reasons why we found that this is helpful for couples to discuss. First, sometimes people have different ideas about what's appropriate in a time-bound commitment. Is it okay to flirt with other people when you're in a time-bound commitment? What about coffee dates with a friend of the opposite sex? What kinds of social media posts are appropriate? How much are you comfortable with your time-bound commitment partner texting other people of the opposite sex during your time-bound commitment, and what those look like? This is not intended for the couple here to try to control each other, but just to be clear about what exclusivity means to the two of you, and defining that and being clear about it up front before it becomes a problem. Second, the level of exclusivity can change depending on the season. So in discovery, if you're going out as friends, you might be open to going out on dates with other people as well. But you would promise not to start a time-bound commitment with anyone else. You could also date each other exclusively during discovery season, but you want to be sure to keep the time-bound commitment short and your interactions lighthearted, right? You want it to fit the season that you're in. In dating, you'll be dating exclusively. You won't be going on dates with anyone else, but it's still important to be clear about flirting, texting, social media, and so on. In discernment, the focus is clearly exclusively on dating each other. And so you want to agree on what the details of that look like. Finally, it's worth noting that if you are trying to start a time-bound commitment with someone and they just don't want to be pinned down by defining exclusivity. So you're having this conversation and they're like, I don't know, that just makes me feel too pinned down, right? They may not be ready for commitment, and that's okay. You can still help each other pursue holiness as friends. And if you remain interested in dating that person, you can check back in with them in a couple months to see if their feelings have changed. But this discussing the level of exclusivity we found can be helpful sometimes for people to realize they're not actually on the same page here. And it's really not a good time for them to start a commitment. This is much better to get this settled and sorted rather than to continue in the vague talking phase for much longer. Okay, next up is the list of promises, and Betsy's going to tell you about it.
Okay. So promises are the heart of a time-bound commitment. Like Chuck explained to you some of the details and some of the structure of it, but the promises are really where I think it gets fun and interesting. So time-bound commitments are designed to be about what you're going to do, not what you're not going to do. So that's where we have a list of promises, and then right here we have, we just call themes, like the kinds of promises you might make, and then obviously it's blank because every time-bound commitment is going to be different. Let's see, it's easier to stay focused with a shorter list, so we say keep it short, like 2 to 5 promises at the most, and you can always try something different later if you have another time-bound commitment later. During discovery season, as you can guess, the promises should be super light, focused on fun, friendship, and maybe serving others. Maybe volunteer together, something like that. During the dating season, your promises are going to be the same way. They still should be focused on fun because dating is supposed to be fun. And it's also important, though, in dating to add some promises about serving and supporting each other in whatever you have going on. If you're a student or if you have a career, serving each other. And you can also, during dating seasons, add promises about growing spiritually and building virtue. During the discernment phase, you're still going to have fun and support each other, but you also might need to have some promises about addressing some tough topics, important topics to talk about before you get married, for instance. And we have a list, although a lot of tough topics are just going to come up on their own, and you might not even have to look at the list, but those tough topics that you just really need to, either maybe they're yellow flags, or maybe they're red flags, and the things you need to work through before you go further into like engagement. So also on the back of the little outline is sample promises. We try to just give you some samples, but of course there's a million different options. So when you're writing the promises, that's when you can really ask for things that really would bless you. And I wanted to tell you an example, is that there's a couple we're mentoring right now. Hi. Sorry, we're going to tell this story. But
They're not in the room, she was saying.
no, I'm saying it to the live stream. But so they had finished a time-bound commitment, and we were helping them to draft another one. And they're in the seriously dating season. And I asked her, I said, what is something that you could do that would just thrill your heart? And so she really thought about it, and she said, flowers. And I was like, okay, so you really love to get flowers. And so we said, like, could you do that as a promise? Like, you could give her flowers once a week. So he was all for it. But she said, no, I don't want to put that in there. And I said, why? It sounds awesome. And she said, I don't want him to feel obligated. And I mean, I understood where she was coming from, but I said, marriage is one big obligation. I was like, you are obligated to stay faithful to that person, but still, your acts of faithfulness are still very romantic and wonderful and precious. So, but she was like, no, I don't want to do that. So I totally understood her reasoning. So they didn't put it in that time-bound commitment, but guess what? He does it anyway now. Because just writing the promises and talking about them got something out of her that she never would have told him. But of course, he loves her and he wants to thrill her heart. So he started giving her flowers once a week anyway, even though it's not in their time-bound commitment. So why is it that these time-bound commitments work? And we have seen them work. One is because they're so much better than conventional dating's vague phases, the talking phase or the official phase, or having an ex, and can you talk to your ex, and who was at fault, But with time-bound commitment, you know exactly what you're committed to and for how long, and what you're going to do during that time-bound commitment. With conventional dating, a person's true character often doesn't come out for a very long time, and sometimes it's only after you've really fallen for them. But with a time-bound commitment, I mean, we can't promise that that everything's going to come to the surface every time. but just keeping the promise reveals something about their character. If someone doesn't keep the promises that you make, that says something. And you can also see what happens. Do they make a lot of excuses? Do they get bored and lazy and decide they don't want to do it anymore? Or do they become offended that there's something required of them? Well, no one wants to end up married to someone who always finds a way to weasel out of everything. So this could be a real clue. So with conventional dating, also, the only way to win is to get the prize, right? To get engaged. But with date to win, you're set up for success because keeping your promises and treating each other with respect all the way through to the end of the time-bound commitment is a beautiful thing. And it's going to build your friendship no matter what. Finally, time-bound commitments build in regular decision points, which makes for much better discernment than conventional dating, where the question to break up or stay together is like always in the back of your mind. Okay, third part of Date to Win is recruit community. So recruiting community is the third part of the formula, and it is not an afterthought. It is absolutely necessary. One of the women I was mentoring in Faith Formation Group shared with me that she was worried about a friend who she was afraid was being controlled by her fiance. So I encouraged the young woman to speak to her friend about it, and she said, "I just don't think it's my place." And I said, "If it's not your place, whose is it?" So there's this epidemic of foolish independence that is part of conventional dating. People think their romantic relationship is nobody's business but theirs. People might ask their peers what they think. Like, what do you think about this or that guy? But if they don't ask, it's like considered disloyal for your peers, for your friends to comment on whatever you're doing. And also, older, wiser people who could actually see problems in your relationship before you can see them, often they don't feel like they can speak into a relationship. They might talk about you and how foolish the decisions, are of the younger generation, but they don't really feel like they can point stuff out. But if you're dating for holiness, and even honestly for happiness, you need community. So one problem is that a lot of people think they have community because they have a lot of interaction with popular media, and it can feel like you have community, but honestly, the vast majority of popular media has really bad models and really bad advice when it comes to romantic relationships, and the more you consume, the more it distorts your view of romance, and the less it helps you to actually discern what is good in reality. And the latest social science shows that none of us are clever enough to avoid the influence of what we're seeing, so really the only thing we can do is to limit our media exposure and carefully curate what we do let through and what we do consume. But on a more positive note, you're here, so you obviously care about quality community and about consulting your community. So here's some things to consider. Peers, to have healthy dating relationships, you need to have great friends. Some of those friends might turn into potential romantic partners. Spiritual mentors. So we are very blessed to have the church to anchor our community. You need spiritually mature people who can help you in your dating relationship. People like priests and religious and devout laypersons and consecrated persons, and of course, the Blessed Mother and the saints. And then your family. So hopefully your family is a positive force in your life, but even if they're not, it's an important part of your community to consider when it comes to dating. And then finally is the Lord. If your goal is holiness, God is the center of your community. Our Lord cares more about your dating than you do, and as you surrender yourself to Him, He will take care of everything. So you want to have people in your life from all of these areas when you're dating someone. You want to be open to their thoughts about your relationship. Some of them, you may have to ask for feedback. Others, you might have to be like, "Thanks for the feedback," but you want to take that with a grain of salt. So, but in any case, you need to spend time as a couple around your community. If you ever feel yourself pulling away from friends and family because of a dating relationship, that is a definite yellow flag. The devil loves to work in isolation and secrecy, so don't give him that chance. We weren't created to go it alone. So that is the end of our description of Date to Win, but Chuck's going to say one last thing.
One last story. The first dating time-bound commitment ever, as far as we know, was Betsy and me. I knew that I loved her, and she wanted to get married. But I had seen a lot of heartache and divorce in my family, and I just wasn't sure. And I didn't know how to get sure. That was a big part of the problem. I panicked and broke it off. Yes, boo on me for that. It is grown worthy. She was shocked and incredibly hurt. But again, I didn't know how to be sure. So I prayed a lot, and I asked some Christians I really respected, and I came up with this idea. I feel like the Lord gave me this idea of a time-bound commitment. I went back to Betsy, who did not deserve to be jerked around like this, and I asked her if she would trust me once more to enter into a time when we would be wholly committed to each other, would dial back the intimacy which had gotten too intense for a couple who weren't yet engaged, and that by the end of our agreement, I promised that I would either step out of her life or ask her to marry me. No more insecurity and confusion. She agreed, and spoiler alert, it worked out great. At the same time, the Lord gave me this guidance about time-bound commitment. He also gave me this prayer that Betsy and I started praying during this time. We think it is still a good one. During that time of discernment, Lord, please reveal to us anything that needs to be revealed, and hide anything that needs to be hidden. Of course, we didn't mean that we should be intentionally hiding things from one another. That's not the point of the prayer. The idea is that none of us know what the future holds. Humans are actually notoriously bad at predicting the future. And so when you commit to marriage, you're committing to whatever issues, triggers, or wounds that might come up for your spouse that neither of you even knew were there, right? 5, 10, 15 years down the road, there may be something that comes up that was latent, it was in there the whole time, but you didn't know it. Well, when you're married, you're in it, right? You're committed. You've got to figure this out. You've got to support each other. You've got to help each other. And some of those kinds of challenges would seem insurmountable if you knew about them when you were in the time of discernment, right? God knew that when Betsy and I were discerning, I didn't need to know that she was going to develop some pretty serious chronic illnesses, which she does struggle with so incredibly beautifully. It probably would have scared me away, honestly. Knowing the me back then, I didn't need to know that. 5 years into our marriage, these chronic illnesses would arrive. Betsy didn't need to know that when I met the most serious career failure that I had encountered, because I was accustomed to being a star in school and achieving anything I wanted to achieve. And so when I finally faced failure, that I would become a really lousy human being for a time. Not anymore. Right? If she had known that then, like this is what Chuck is going to act like when he faces failure, she probably would not have signed up, right? But in the wisdom of God, she didn't need to know, and I didn't need to know during that time of discernment. What we did need to know was that our confidence and our faith in discernment was not in our ability to make really great decisions or predict the future. Our confidence in discernment was in a God who loves us more than we could ever care about or love ourselves, right? So this prayer we continue to commend to couples throughout the dating process, and particularly in the discernment process. In a way, this prayer really captures the heart of Date to Win. The revised prize, the remodeled system, and the recruited community are all ways of surrendering to God and trusting every part of our lives, including dating, to God's loving care. Thank you guys for inviting us to be here with you tonight, and we're excited to have